Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever. And today we're talking about Brahms Symphony Number 4. It's the first time I think that this has popped up in this series, so it may show up again multiple times because there are many great performances of Brahms' Fourth. But this one, I think, is one of the most individual and powerful and passionate and remarkable of them all. It's Leopold Stokowski with the new Philharmonia Orchestra on RCA. I think it was the last recording he ever made, or one of the last. We were talking about artists who knew when to retire, or who didn't know when to retire, and how so many of them just kept making recordings into their decrepitude. They got worse and worse and slower and sloppier. Stokowski was one of the great exceptions. He lived to his 90s. He was born in the dawn of time, and he never lost it. Never at all. It was extraordinary, in that respect. There are exceptions to every rule, and he was one of them. He certainly was. And this Brahms Fourth is marvelous. Now, Stokowski was known as a showman, as someone who used to tinker and play with scores, and who wasn't terribly respectful of the composer's literal intentions, shall we say. He was more into projecting the spirit than the letter of what the composer wrote. He was a chord guy. In other words, he was into sound, the sensuousness of sound, creating a beautiful sound through balancing of strings and winds and brass and interesting seating arrangements of the orchestra, and experimenting with recordings and technology and all of these things, which most people would consider to be inimical to correct Brahms' interpretation, because Brahms, of course, was first of all, he's a polyphonist. He is not a chord guy at all. Sensuousness of sound was the last thing he was worried about. He was more interested in line and clarity and that kind of stuff, and symphonic development, and all of those healthy German virtues, theoretically. And so to have Stokowski deliver one of the great Brahms performances, and actually he did several. The only symphony he never got was the third, which is true of most people who do Brahms. Stokowski did the most horrible Brahms third that anybody could ever do. Just awful. But he made extraordinarily fine recordings of numbers 1, 2, and 4. And he also, I think, made the first complete Brahms cycle with the Philadelphia Orchestra, way at the dawn of recorded history. One of the first Brahms cycles, in any case. Really quite an amazing effort. And he had little spoken introductions to some of the symphonies where he said, "Ooh, Brahms loved melody so much that he just stuffed tons of them in all of his symphonies." That's a very Stokowskian attitude, because you play the tunes, right? All of which is evidence of his theoretical superficiality as a human being, as an interpreter, and particularly as a conductor of Brahms. Well, that's all BS. He is a fabulous interpreter of Brahms. He was actually, remember, a contemporary of Brahms for quite some years. He was in his 90s when he died in the 70s, so he was around for around 20 years when Brahms was around, which is kind of cool. And he certainly understood the late Romantic style, the aesthetic, Brahms's music. No question about that. The only issue was what he was going to do on the day. Well, in this particular recording of the Fourth, he is amazing. It's a swift recording. You'd never know he was in his 90s. It sounds youthful and fresh and vibrant. It really extraordinary, particularly the first movement, which begins at quite a clip. But the whole performance is like that. It's just, there's nothing eccentric about it. He doesn't do anything bizarre. He doesn't rescore anything in an enormously noticeable way, not more than most people do if you double winds and do things like that. Everybody tinkers a little bit with these symphonies, but he's no better or worse than anyone else in that regard. He plays the music like something newly discovered. Really phenomenal. The final movement, too, is very passionate and exciting. I mean, the whole performance is just so vivid. And when you think that the guy was in his 90s when he did it, and the orchestra plays fabulously, and it's well recorded because Stokowski cared about what his recordings sounded like. I mean, it's really an amazing achievement. So it was last available boxed up in this 14 CD RCA recordings. You can get them separately. And I'm sure you can download or stream them separately. I'm positive of that because I have this thing streamed, so I know that you could get it that way. On CD, it was coupled quixotically to Mahler's Second Symphony, to the very strange Stokowski Mahler Symphony No. 2, which has wonderful things in it, but is a little bit on the weird side. But this Brahms, it was just as a filler. It really should have been the main event. It was one of the great recordings that Stokowski made, and one of the greatest recordings ever of Brahms Symphony No. 4. Give it a shot. And keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.